Welcome everyone, Fruits of the Orchard. We are beginning a new book, the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot. And as we do every week, we try to take articles from Fruits of the Orchard and explain them and add deeper understandings. So in this parsha, there are actually 4 different articles. And we're going to take the first 3 and we're going to combine them together, even though they're written as separate ideas. There's a theme running through the first 3 articles. The first one is called the Soul of Moshe. And tonight we're going to be looking at the source of the soul of Moshe, and also some of his Gilgulim, reincarnations. And we are going to also be understanding from the letters of Moshe's name, the essence of who Moshe was. The next article is drawn from water. As we'll see, the name Moshe means he was drawn from the water. And the next one is a fire that does not consume. And that is about the burning bush, the bush that was burning but was not consumed. So the theme that's going to run through all of these and tie it all together is the idea of water and fire. Now, why would that be such an important theme running through this parsha, but specifically to understand who Moshe was? The soul of Moshe. So simply, if you look at the letters of Moshe's name, the first letter is a mem. Mem is always associated with water. The word for water in Hebrew is mayim. Actually has 2 mems. So the first letter of Moshe's name is mem, water. And this is the name given to him by Bat Paro. This is not his Hebrew name. And yet, on the merit of Bat Paro, the daughter of Paro, who was considered a very, very righteous individual, we call him Moshe. The Midrash actually says that Moshe had 10 different names. And all Hebrew names. Moshe was given by Bat Paro. And the Torah explains what it means. Min hamayim mishitihu. From the water I drew him out. That's the Torah's explanation. That's Bat Paro's explanation of why she named him Moshe. Because from the water, from the little ark that he was floating up the Nile, he was drawn from the water. But we're going to see it's much deeper than that. The second letter in Moshe's name is a shin. Shin is always associated with fire, Aish. And the last letter is a hey. And the letter hey is always connected to expression. So the soul of Moshe is expressed by, is symbolized by both water and fire. And we're going to see how that plays itself through everything that we're talking about today. So the first thing is, what's the connection with water? Well, we see throughout Moshe's life, everything is connected to water. He was put in an ark, a little boat on the Nile, because his parents were afraid that any time he would be snatched from them and drowned in the Nile. And so they put him in a boat and prayed for God's compassion. And it was answered, because the daughter of Paro, of all people, of all people, to save Moshe is the daughter of Paro. And so he is saved through the water. His name is given through the water. He meets his wife, Zipporah, at the well. He leads Israel through the sea. he hits the rock and brings forth water. And then the second time he hits the rock, but he was supposed to have spoken to it. And the result is God says, you can't come into the land of Israel. So we see that the theme of water runs through Moshe's entire life. And the Midrash says that when Moshe was put in the ark on the Nile, the astrologers, they had a certain amount of prophecy, but they got it a bit wrong. They saw that Moshe was they saw that the Redeemer, why were they drowning all the boys? Because the astrologers said that a Redeemer was imminently about to be born. And so their solution was to drown all of the boys. When Moshe was put on the Nile, so the astrologers saw that they thought he was going to drown. And so therefore they then canceled the decree. And they saw that Moshe was being judged by water. So they had what's called unclear prophecy, because later Moshe was judged by water when he hit the rock and he didn't speak to it. And therefore he could not come into Eretz Israel. So here we see water running through all of Moshe's life. But to go a little bit deeper, so the Arizal revealed that part of the soul of Moshe was the reincarnated soul of Noach. Of course, Noach is all about water also. He builds the ark for 120 years, and then he survives the flood that was 40 days and 40 nights. So one of the connections with Moshe is that Noach built the ark for 120 years, and Moshe lived 120 years. Noach survived the flood of 40 days, and we see the number 40 runs through all of Moshe's life as well. Even though there's differences of opinions how old Moshe was when he left Egypt, we'll get to that in a while, after he killed the Egyptian and he had to flee Egypt. So there's different opinions how old he was there, but one of the opinions, one of the more important ones, is he was 40 years old. God appeared to him at the burning bush when he was 80, meaning another 40 years. And then he led Israel for 40 years. So in other words, his life was divided into 3 periods of 40. And those 3 periods of 40 were, in a sense, reproduced, that Moshe spent 3 periods of 40 days on Mount Sinai. The first 40 days when he was receiving the Torah. The next 40 is when he came down and he broke the tablets and he prayed for forgiveness. But he went back up to Mount Sinai and he prayed for forgiveness. And then God said, go down and carve out 2 more tablets and come back up to Mount Sinai. That was for the last 40 days. And that was from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur. So Moshe's life is divided into 3 periods of 40, and his time on Mount Sinai was divided into 3 periods of 40. And this is very connected to Noach. Now, in a classic teaching from the Arizal, he explains that Noach was a tzaddik. Humanity was saved through Noach, but it's pointed out that he had a lacking. There was, in a sense, a blemish in his soul, that he didn't really pray for his generation to be saved. He didn't approach God like Abraham did. and as Moshe did, as we'll see in a second, to plead for his generation. We don't see that Noah did that. And it was considered a pretty major flaw in the soul of Noah. It didn't cancel out that the Torah calls him a tzaddik, and the world, in a sense, was saved through Noah. But still, there is a certain criticism that he didn't plead for his generation. And so it's said that when the golden calf happened and Moshe broke the tablets, but then God said to him, move out of my way, please move out of my way, and I will destroy the people, and I'll create a new people from you. I'll start all over. You'll be like Avram Avinu. You'll be like the father of the Jewish people. And Moshe said to God, if you do such a thing, wipe me out of the book that you have written. In Hebrew, mecheni na mesifrecha asher katafta. Wipe me out of your book. In other words, I'll have nothing to do with this. There's a classic Rashi on this, that what did God mean when he said, please get out of my way, please move out of my way, and I'll destroy the people. Excuse me. So Rashi says that Moshe understood God was giving him a hint. In other words, please move out of the way. If I don't move out of the way, then God can't destroy the people. So Moshe not only didn't step out of the way, but he said, if you are even entertaining such a thought, then mecheni na mesifrecha asher katafta. And the Ari said that if you look at the word mecheni, which means wipe me out, it's the same letters as Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. And the Ari said that at that moment, that part of Noach's soul had a tikkun, was rectified, because he didn't plead for his generation. And here, his soul that's within Moshe is fixing that now by not getting out of God's way and not accepting this invitation that I'll make a new people from you. Instead, Moshe pleaded for his generation. So this is a very, very deep connection as to the soul of Moshe, the part of his soul that was Noach. Reb Shlomo asks, why didn't Noach plead for his generation? So in a certain way, Noach, who wanted to do God's will, and it seemed that God had given up on that generation and that God had considered the people evil. So Noach was, well, if God considers them evil, who am I to get in the way? Who am I to try to change God's mind, as it were? So that's one idea. But Reb Shlomo brings a different idea. It's not in contradiction, but he says that there was something in Noach's soul that lacked self-confidence, that he could get people to change. He lacked the confidence that he had either the charisma or the power to convince people to change their ways. He just didn't have that confidence. So we see a very, very interesting thing with Moshe. At the burning bush, which we're going to discuss more in detail as we continue the class, according to Rashi, it was a 7-day conversation between God and Moshe. God comes, says, I've chosen you as the leader. Go back to Egypt and I'll be with you and we're going to save the people. But we see that Moshe looked for he had every excuse. I can't speak. I'm not the right person. They won't listen to me. There are people who are better than me. So we see on a very, very deep level the manifestation of the soul of Noach at this point in Moshe's life. It seems that Moshe also is lacking the confidence. He says, there are people better than me. I'm not up to it. I don't know how to speak. I can't speak. So we see a very deep lack of self-confidence in Moshe. Nonetheless, God puts it on Moshe. In the end, he basically didn't give him a choice, and Moshe went along with it. But we see that the first time he goes and he confronts Paro, and Paro actually doubles their work. He says, not only won't I let the people go, and I'm not going to listen to you, and I don't know who your God is, and I don't recognize him, but I'm going to make it twice as hard on the Jewish people. And so Moshe turns to God and says, why have you sent me? Why have you done evil to this people? Why have you sent me? And then in the next Parsha, in Parshat Ve'era, God sends him back to Paro. And Moshe says, how is Paro going to listen to me? The people don't even listen to me now after what's happened. So we see there's a dynamic here of a certain lack of confidence in Moshe. But here's the greatness of Moshe, is he overcame it. There's a certain place during the plagues, all of a sudden, we don't see Moshe expressing doubts anymore. There's a certain place where he takes upon himself 100% the task, the mission that God has given him, and he goes forward. And from that point on, many times the people wanted to stone him, the people wanted to rebel against him, the people wanted to go back to Egypt. He never wavered. He went full speed ahead. And this is part of the tikkun of not only Noach within Moshe, but Moshe himself. And here we see a very, very important thing, is that the great people in the Torah, in the Tanakh, they're not angels, they're not perfect, and they're human beings who also go through changes and grow spiritually, and are challenged and sometimes make mistakes. But their greatness is that they prevail, they persevere, and they become the great people that they are. And in a sense, it's so much greater than if we conceive of all of these great people, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, the tribes, and we look at them as somehow being perfect in a certain way that takes away from their greatness. They had to earn it. They worked for it. They merited whatever levels of closeness to God and whatever task that God gave them, they merited. So here we've delved into the soul of Moshe and the connection with water, but there's fire there also. And we see this, that when the Torah says Moshe went out to check up on his brothers, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew, and he's going to kill him. And so Moshe, with the fire, remember the second letter of Moshe's name is a shin, is fire. He defends the Jew, who is a stranger to him, and he kills the Egyptian and he buries him. Later, when he flees Egypt, so he comes to a well and he sees the shepherds are mistreating the women at the well. And Moshe is by himself, and there are a lot of shepherds. But here again, we see he jumps to their defense, and he saves, it was Zipporah and her sisters. And of course, later, he goes up to Mount Sinai, and we're told that the mountain was on fire, it was full of smoke. And yet Moshe is not afraid. He goes up the mountain and he spends 40 days on the mountain. So here we see the fire in Moshe as well as the water. We're going to develop this even further. But now I want to return to the soul of Moshe. And I don't have it in front of me, but it's on YouTube, where Rabbi Ginsburg gave a whole analysis and a whole soul history of Moshe. And most of it is based on the Arizal. I don't have the link in front of me right now, but hopefully you'll be able to find it on YouTube. Or maybe Ephraim will try to find it and post it. And the Ariz says that the three letters of Moshe's name, the Mem is for Moshe, the Shin is for Shet, and the Hey is for Hevel. Hevel is Abel, the two brothers, Cain and Abel. When Abel is killed, Adam and Eve had another son called Shet, I guess in English, Seth. And the Ari mentions that the soul of Moshe goes all the ways back to really the first humans. Hevel, Shet, Moshe. And Rav Ginsburg makes the comment that in a certain sense, the soul of Moshe is the most primordial of all souls, and in a sense appears in every generation. Because later the Zohar says that the soul of Moshe appears in every generation. And that's meant to understand in the leaders of every generation have a part of the soul of Moshe. And so we see that from the first children of Adam and Eve till Mashiach, the soul of Moshe is ever present. Now, this is an amazing insight, because about Moshe and his connection to Mashiach, we say, Hua Goel Arishon, Hua Goel Acharon. He is the first Redeemer, and he will be the last Redeemer. In other words, the soul of Moshe will be in the Mashiach, along with David. And it's given over that David will be the body, the nefesh of Mashiach, Mashiach ben David. And Moshe will be the neshama, the higher levels of soul of Mashiach. Now let's just look at the first two letters of Moshe's name, Mem, Shin. And let's look at the first two letters of Mashiach, Mem, Shin. And so this is a remez, a hint that the soul of Moshe will be present in Mashiach. The Alter Rebbe said that every Jew has a spark of Moshe, and he identifies it as the intellect, as the pure intellect, which is coming from Moshe. Moshe, especially in prophecy, was on a level that no other human being has ever reached. And we're told even Mashiach will not be as great in Nevuah as Moshe. So here we see the soul of Moshe going all the ways back to Abel. And we could even say from Adam, because the Arizal said that the three letters of Adam, Aleph, Daled, Mem. Aleph is Adam, the Daled is David, and the Mem is Mashiach. But there's another way we could look at this, that the Aleph is also Avraham, which begins with an Aleph, David, which begins with a Daled, and Moshe. But Moshe and Mashiach are virtually the same. So Moshe's soul goes all the way back to Adam. Now, on a deeper level, in a certain way, it goes back even before Adam. How do we see that? The name that he's given is Min Hamayim Mishitihu. From the water, I have drawn him. Now, we have an expression that we've used many times, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. Anytime that the word water is mentioned in the Torah, it's a hint to Torah itself. There's no water other than Torah. It's a hint to Torah. And we say that God looked into the Torah and created the world. And the Torah is compared to water. So on a very, very deep level, the soul of Moshe is drawn not just from the water of the Nile, it's drawn from the primordial waters even before creation. That's one of the secrets that in the second verse of the Torah, water is mentioned, but it never says it was created. It says that God created the heaven and the earth, but it doesn't mention that God created water. It was just there, as it were. So this water represents a reflection of a more primordial reality before this reality of time and space. And therefore, that's why at the burning bush, so God calls Moshe, Moshe, calls his name twice. So the Midrash tells us there's only 4 individuals in the Tanakh who are called by their name twice by God. Interesting enough, that Noach, his names come together. Ela toldot Noach, Noach, and then it goes on, he was a tzaddik. So it's Noach, but it's not that God called him. There's only 4 individuals that God called, and that is Avraham, Yaakov, Moshe, and Shmuel, Samuel. And we're told that on 3 of them, if you look in a printed Chumash, not in the Torah itself, but in a printed Chumash, there'll be a thick black line between Avraham, Yaakov, and Shmuel. But with Moshe, there's no line. And this indicates it indicates many things, but it indicates the primordial source of the soul of Moshe. So Moshe is this archetypal soul that in a sense spans all of creation, spans all of history, spans all of Jewish history, and will culminate in the coming of Mashiach. Chaim l'chaim. Now, I want to go back briefly to the incident of Moshe killing the Egyptian. After he kills the Egyptian and he buries him in the sand, it says that the thing was was heard. Kain noda hadavar. This incident became known. And then it says, and Paro sought to kill Moshe, and Moshe had to flee. So the simple understanding is Moshe understood that Paro had heard. And the aggravating thing is who revealed this? The Jew whom Moshe saved. Because the next day Moshe went out again, and the Jew that he had saved was arguing with another Jew. And so Moshe tried to intervene to break up the fight. And he said, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And then the next thing we know, Paro is heard, and Moshe has to flee. And so Rashi says an amazing thing, that again, the simple understanding of noda hadavar, the incident became known, was as we just explained. But Rashi says that Moshe said, now this thing is known to me, why the Jews are in exile. Because if a Jew who's just had his life saved by someone can turn around and turn him in, like maybe they deserve exile. Rashi brings this. In other words, this is part of the doubt that we talked about before that Moshe expressed at the burning bush. And in fact, he kept on saying, they're not going to listen to me. And what Moshe really meant is, they're not on the level to listen to me. And so God said, put your hand in your chest and then pull it out. And he pulled it out and it was leprous. And we're told that this was because he was speaking Lashon Hara. He was speaking evil speech about the Jewish people. So there was a transition that Moshe needs to go. If you can imagine, he was Prince of Egypt. He could have, in a sense, he could have been the next Pharaoh. He was like on the top of the world. And next thing he knows, he's in exile for 40 years. He had to leave Egypt penniless because another Jew turned him in. So you can understand his let's say, bitterness and his doubts about the Jewish people, what's going to be with them. So when God comes to him at the burning bush, we can now understand it's not only a lack of self-confidence, but it's also a 40 years of bitterness of what he went through. But as we said before, the greatness of Moshe is he overcame that. Now that's the same way that Yosef is called a tzaddik. So we're told he's called a tzaddik because he was able to overcome the sexual urge and the whole incident with the wife of Potiphar. But we're told on a much deeper level, Hasidus explains, is if there was ever a person who had reason to take revenge against his brothers or to hate his brothers, we could imagine it's Yosef. Yosef ended up in jail for 12 years. Like he had, we would say, decent reason to be upset at his brothers, but he overcame that. And he brought peace to the family, and he protected his family, and he fed his family. And even at the end of last parsha, when the brothers expressed fear that Yosef was going to take revenge on them after Yaakov died, so he cried. he cried that they didn't believe that he really had overcome his emotions, and he really loved his brothers, and he was willing to, as he said to them, you meant to do me evil, God meant to do me and us good. And he understood that. So this is a very deep understanding of the dynamics that's going on in the life of Moshe, where on one hand, he's fire, and he's willing to put his life on the line. And we've spoken about a couple of examples already, when he kills the Mitzri, when he defends the daughters of Yitro, when he stands in the way of God and says, if you are going to destroy the people, wipe me out of your book. And he puts up with the people for 40 years. So he was a fiery individual. He broke the tablets. He knew how to take initiative. And yet, as we explained, the part of him that was Noach, it needed to work itself out, this lack of self-confidence, these doubts. But they did work themselves out. And the soul of Noach did get a tikkun. Now, very quickly, we mentioned that the soul of Moshe, the three letters of Moshe are Mem is Moshe, Shin is Shet, and Hey is Hevel. Of course, the whole story of Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel. And in that story, so Cain kills Hevel. So the Ari, again, what will we do without the Arizal? Reveals that there were three people in Moshe's life who were a reincarnation of Cain. Just like Moshe is a reincarnation of Hevel, of Abel. So there were three people. The first one was the Mitzri, the Egyptian that he killed. And what does the Torah say? What did he do with the body? He buried him just like Cain buried, or at least the earth swallowed up the blood of Hevel. And that's when God came to Cain, said, the blood of your brothers crying to me from the earth that had swallowed up the blood. So the Ari said that the Mitzri, he is a reincarnation of Cain, but this time Hevel kills Cain and buries him. Later, we're told that Korach, part of Korach, so the one who led a rebellion against Moshe, and Moshe prayed for a new creation to prove that he was the appointed leader from God. And the earth came and swallowed up Korach and his followers. The Ari said that this was the two brothers in reversed role again. And this time again, Cain gets swallowed up. And so what we could see here, we could ask the question, well, wasn't it all fixed when Moshe killed the Mitzri? Well, things are not that black and white and that simple. There's many different levels of the soul, many different levels of rectifications that need to be made. And so the soul of Cain could be reincarnated many times, and each time there's either a measure for measure, call it a punishment for what he did, or a tikkun. Now the tikkun comes with the third person that the Ari says is a reincarnation of Cain. And again, anytime we say reincarnation, it means that part of the soul. It doesn't mean that the whole soul of Korach was Cain. Korach was, until that whole incident, was considered a very righteous person. In fact, the Midrash said he never did anything wrong in his whole life. until that whole incident where his ego got the best of him. But Cain also had a good side. It wasn't just evil. And so that good part of Cain was reincarnated into Yitro. And there's actually many midrashim, which I'm not going to go into now, of certain battles that went on between Moshe and Yitro that are not revealed in the text. It wasn't always so simple, but they worked it out. And at one point when in Parshat Yitro, obviously Yitro had a lot of merit, that the same Parsha that we received the Torah is called Parshat Yitro. And I think I saw before that Devorah was saying that her birthday is Parshat Yitro. So that's coming up. Should have a good birthday, a good year. So when Yitro comes, after the splitting of the Red Sea, and Moshe leads the people out of Egypt, so Yitro comes and he says, Ani chotancha Yitro, I am your father-in-law Yitro. And so it's brought down that the three letters of these, the acronym of Ani chotancha Yitro, the Ani is the Aleph, the Chet is from your father-in-law, and the Yud is from Yitro. It spells out Achi, my brother. And this is brought as a remez that Yitro was saying. Again, it was what we call unclear prophecy. Unconscious was saying, we're not. It's not just that you're my son-in-law, but on a deep level, we're actually brothers. We're Cain and Abel, just in a different scenario. Now, one more piece of the puzzle, and then we're going to get to the burning bush, is, as we mentioned, the Zohar says that the soul of Moshe appears in every generation. So there's two particular people where it's considered the soul of Moshe was part of their soul, and that was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. This comes from the Ari, and the Ari himself. That the Ari is considered a Gilgul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is considered a Gilgul of Moshe. And there we see something very similar, is Moshe was the one who gave over the written Torah and the oral Torah. But Moshe also gave over the mystical Torah. The mystical Torah is part of the oral Torah. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in his life, he revealed secrets of the mystical tradition that had never been revealed before. And in the Zohar, on a number of occasions, you have conversations between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the soul of Moshe. They're actually communicating on a very, very high level. But just like Moshe gave over the written and the oral Torah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the link that gives over the mystical Torah, really until our day today. And the other thing very much in common, just like Moshe had to flee Egypt, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had to flee the Romans. And he ended up in a cave for 12 years. And then he spent another year, altogether 13 years in a cave with his son. And so he went through a similar type of process that Moshe went through. About the Arizal, so even before the Ari, was born in Jerusalem, spent his first 5 years in Jerusalem. And when his father died, his mother had no means of support. Her brother, who was quite wealthy, lived in Egypt. And so the Ari's mother brought their whole family down to Egypt. The Ari spent almost his entire life in Egypt. And only the last 2.5 years did he spend in Sfat, which is a whole story in itself. But the amazing thing is everything that we hear about the Ari comes from a mere 2.5 years that he spent in Sfat, which is, it's just astounding, actually. But what I want to say now is, it's told that even before he came to Tzfat, when the Ari's son was 3 years old, he made a pilgrimage to the gravesite of the Rashbi, of Shimon Bar Yochai, to give his son a haircut. And this really is in a sense, the source of going to Meron to bring young 3-year-old boys to have their first haircut. There's also a tradition that before that, people used to go to the grave of Shmuel and Navi, of Samuel, because he was a Nazir. He didn't cut his hair. But once the Ari came, but the story I want to tell you is connected to his soul and the Rashbi's soul, is that most of the teaching that the Ari did was outside. And he would take his students on journeys, and they would learn outside. So one of his frequent places that he brought his students was to Meron, to the gravesite of the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And one time it's recorded that the Arizal sat down and he placed his students in a circle around him in a certain order. And this was the order that one of the most mysterious and profound sections of the Zohar is called the Idra Rabbah. The Idra Rabbah is the great meeting place, the great threshing floor, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed awesome secrets of the Torah. And there were 10 people there. And so this one time the Arizal sat down and he told each one, he came with, there were 10 of them. And he placed them and he said, this is where Rabbi Abba sat. This is where my son Rabbi Elazar sat. This is where Rabbi Yossi sat. This is where Rabbi Yehuda sat. And he set his students in a certain order, and he began teaching them. And then he revealed to them that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his soul, was hovering over them and was getting tremendous pleasure from their learning. And so it's handed down in tradition that they understood from this that the Ari was revealing to them that he was a Gilgul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that his main student, Chaim Vital, was a Gilgul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's son, Rabbi Elazar. And all of the students that were with him were incarnations of the main students of Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So this is an amazing story. And so it's brought down that the Ari was a Gilgul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which means that he was also had in his generation the part of Moshe. Okay, so now in the beginning I said that I wanted to develop this theme of the water and the fire. So we talked a lot about the water in Moshe's life, in Noah's life. We talked about the fire at different times in Moshe's life, but the most symbolic is when God appeared to him at the burning bush. And it's described as a burning bush that was not consumed. Hasneh boer ve'enenu ukal. The bush was burning but was not consumed. And so we want to understand that on a deeper level, and especially the connection to Moshe, because the symbolism of that the bush was burning but was not consumed is very paradoxical. Obviously, and even in the text, it says that Moshe saw this phenomenon, and it says, I have to go see what this is. He understood this is not normal, that there's something mystical or miraculous happening here, that there's a bush burning, but it's not consumed. So this is telling us something very, very deep about the message that God was giving to Moshe, and also the message for the Jewish people and for each and every one of us. So one of the ideas is, why did God appear that way? Is he was telling Moshe that I can understand, obviously God knows beforehand what Moshe is thinking and Moshe's reaction is going to be. And we see this throughout Jewish history. It would be a whole class in itself, but all the times that God or an angel comes to an individual saying, God has chosen you as a leader, and they all don't want to take it on. Through humbleness, through, we could call it just not feeling up to the task, and also the reality of being a leader. So in our vernacular, we have this term, burnt out, burning out. I feel burnt out. So we all know that feeling at different times, and sometimes quite often in our lives at different junctures, we feel burnt out by circumstances, by all kinds of things, by jobs, by relationships, by our own lackings, our inabilities, and we get burnt out. So anyone who has ever had a leadership position knows how true this is, how easy it is to get burnt out with being a leader. And so this is one of many lessons that God was trying to show Moshe. He was saying, I'll be with you. And that you don't have to worry about being on fire. God understood that Moshe was not just water, but was also fire. But fire has the nature of burning out. That's just science. Fire eventually is, unless you feed it continually, will burn out. And God is saying, I'm assuring you, if you take this task on, I'll assure you that you won't burn out. Now we see later, though, in one almost shocking incident in the book of Bamidbar, where Moshe gets so frustrated, he says to God, if you don't help me, go ahead and kill me. And that's where God says, okay, I'll give you the 70 elders. But it's almost a shocking thing, but it's so real. That's the point I was trying to make before. Moshe is a human being. And even if God assures him, I'll be with you, everything will be right, you don't have to worry about burnout, but Moshe is also a human being. But still, Moshe stuck with it for 40 years against almost impossible odds and led the people from slavery to freedom. A people that it says in the book of Bamidbar, God says they've tested me 10 times. But Moshe had to go through all of these 10 tests. It wasn't that they were just testing God, they were testing Moshe. So we see from this that there is a positive fire in the soul, and there's a negative fire. The negative fire, anger. Like we even get red in the face. When someone gets angry, person gets literally red in the face. Their emotions become fiery. On the other hand, the soul is always compared to a candle. Ner Hashem nishmat adam. The soul is the candle of God is the soul of man. And this is the most positive thing about the soul. The soul is on fire to serve God, to fulfill its mission. There's a very, very beautiful gematria that one of the words for a flame in Hebrew is shalhevet. And this comes in a Rashi when Aaron lights the menorah. So Rashi says that the mitzvah is ad hashalhevet olah me'aleha. In other words, he can't just light it and turn around and walk away until he's sure that it will stay lit by itself. Ad hashalhevet olah me'aleha, by itself. So Rashi brings that the flame of the menorah is called the shalhevet. Shalhevet equals 737, which equals the very important term b'chal levavcha, uv'chal nafshecha, uv'chal me'odecha. That we're commanded to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. B'chal levavcha, uv'chal nafshecha, uv'chal me'odecha equals 737 equals shalhevet. In other words, our service of God is meant to be fiery. It's meant to be the good part of fire. Now, another place that we see this, something that we've all heard, but it's important to mention it here, and this is the idea that the name of man and the name of woman is Ish and Isha. Most of you will recognize this Torah. Ish and Isha. And the Gemara points out that the two letters that are common to both man and woman, Ish and Isha, is Aleph and Shin, fire. The man has a Yud and the woman has a Hey. These two letters make up a name of God, Yud and Hey. So the Gemara says that when a couple gets together, if their relationship is based on godliness, holiness. That's why we always bless a couple who are getting married to build a bayit ne'aman b'Yisrael, a faithful Jewish home. And so when God is in the home, that fire is harnessed, is directed towards holiness. It's a holy fire, Eish Kodesh, a holy fire. But what happens if you take out the Yud and the Hey? You're left with just fire. And the Gemara says that fire will consume the couple. because there's no spiritual, godly, holy cement or glue holding the relationship together. And this we see so much in modern society, where so many relationships, male-female relationships, are born out of sexual attraction. And many times the couple confuse this with love and pursue the relationship. And in too many cases, the fire burns out. At a certain place, the fire burns out. It's a fire that does consume. So all of this is hinted to in the burning bush. The idea that, going back to the beginning of our class, that Moshe is both water and fire. And each one of them he needed to develop. And again, he brings down the Torah from Sinai. Ein mayim ela Torah. And so we're going to end by now applying it to ourselves, because the Alter Rebbe said we all have a bit of Moshe in us. So he defined this as intellect, but here we can define it in an additional way, that everyone has this fire and water in them. That's why when we look at the Sfirot, so the right side of the Sfirot is called the masculine, the left is called the feminine, and the right side is called water, and the left side is called Eish. And the nature of water is water descends. Wherever water is, it always seeks to fall to the lowest level. Fire is just the opposite. Fire seeks to flame upward. Now, within an individual, we have to learn to balance those, because water puts out fire, and fire makes water evaporate. So every person has these two elements of water and fire, and we all have to learn how to balance them. We see in the life of Moshe, we see that there were times that his fiery nature came out very, very clearly. And where do we see his water nature come out? We didn't mention this, but it's important, where the Torah says Moshe was the most humble person on the face of the earth. Moshe's soul, in a sense, fell to the lowest existential level of lowliness. At the same time, he goes up to Mount Sinai, and in the Midrash, it says he went into heaven, not only on Mount Sinai, he was in heaven for 40 days. So, and heaven, it's a beautiful connection. Heaven is Shemayim. The shin is fire and water. Shemayim. Mayim, and the shin is Eish. And we're told in heaven, there is no contradiction between fire and water. That's what our positive associations with heaven is, because there are no contradictions. There are no paradoxes. Fire and water have no problem dwelling together. In this world, a little bit of a problem. But that's our challenge. So I want to give us a bracha that just like Moshe was able to overcome many, many obstacles. If we look at the life of Moshe, it wasn't a simple life he led. he was really challenged throughout his whole life, from the time he was 9 months old and he was put on an ark on the Nile, and until he hits the rock and he can't come into Eretz Israel. His life was full of challenges, but he overcame them in just such an amazing way. And as we've pointed out, he was a human being like all of us, and he had the positive fire. He had a little bit the negative fire. He had water that can put out fire, which is not necessarily good, but he also has water that can make everything grow. So I just want to bless all of us that from this point in the Torah to the end, Moshe is the main character. In the book of Bereshit, we had Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, the Imahot. Moshe is the main thing. Obviously, there are other central personalities, but not like Moshe. Moshe becomes the centerpiece until the end of the Torah. So the more we understand about the nature of Moshe, of his reincarnations, of the source of his soul, the more we'll understand the upcoming 4 books of the Torah.